And back to our top story, and hundreds of demonstrators and police have clashed in Shanghai and several other cities as protests over China's harsh COVID restrictions flared for the third day in a row. These unprecedented wave of demonstrations have been seen as the biggest test for President Xi Jinping since he secured a historic third term in power. The anger resulting from the government's zero COVID policy nearly 3 years into the pandemic. And joining me now is Professor Kerry Brown, a China specialist from King's College London. Professor Brown, thank you very much for your time. As I just said there, we're 3 years into the pandemic. China is still pursuing a zero COVID policy. Given these protests, can that continue?
Well, clearly not. I mean, they're already relaxing some of the restrictions in Xinjiang, which has had this horrific 100-day kind of lockdown. We had to remember, though, originally the government's pandemic response in China, at least amongst most of the sort of population, was something that they wanted. I mean, they were very fearful of the virus. They didn't understand what its impact could be, and they definitely wanted the government to respond. And the government at that time, about 18 months to 2 years ago, committed to this track and trace sort of method. They did come up with a virus, but that virus has not been as kind of clinically effective as other vaccines that have been produced. So, you know, in a sense, the change has come about in the last year as we've seen these place lockdowns, so specific places going into lockdowns. Like I think Xi'an was the first one, and then Shanghai, and now other places. And those have really, really obviously tried people's patience because they have been much longer and very, very fierce. People have not been able often to leave their houses than I think was expected. So I think people's tolerance now has pretty much gone.
This is a true test for President Xi Jinping, but it's also part of a broader systemic issue, isn't it? A growing educated population who not only is chafing against harsh COVID restrictions, but against the government's rule in general. What options does the Chinese leader have?
Well, I mean, although there have been footage of people, wanting Xi Jinping to be removed from office, I mean, I'm not sure it's that straightforward. I mean, I think there are probably people that definitely want that in China, but there's other people that just want these policies to go. And there's others that are very worried about the economy. And I think the problem is that there's no easy alternative. I don't think Chinese people look with great envy at what happened in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, or in many ways in the rest of the world too, where they also see lots of confusion and division and, not a great deal of economic productivity. So I think that Chinese people have very complicated views. It's hard to characterize them. What they hear is a government that says, we care about, people first policies and we're efficient, but doesn't seem to be kind of carrying those into practice in this particular area on COVID, where on the one hand, it doesn't seem to be very efficient. And on the other hand, too, it doesn't seem to be people focused. So the government can do things, and autocracy can reverse out of these things without having to face pesky, opposition politicians, obviously. It has flexibility. The question is whether it's able to do things quick enough to respond to the very specific things that people are worried and annoyed about at the moment.
In recent years, though, Professor, we've seen what the Chinese government can do in Hong Kong by enforcing a harsh crackdown. So are we likely to see the same thing in Shanghai and other Chinese cities?
Well, we've already seen pretty brutal treatment by the security forces. I mean, the security forces are meant to deal with this, and their mandate from the central government is use whatever methods you can to restore public order. And I mean, we hear that from politicians elsewhere, of course, including an American president in the last couple of years, when there was a protest in Washington. So that kind of approach is not weird. What is the problem is that I think security forces overreact, and we've seen really brutal treatment in the last few days, and that creates greater public resentment. That is not sustainable. I think what we're likely to see is some attempts to at least message and, kind of calm people down. That might get out of control. I mean, people talk about this being a new, 1989. Those protests went on for several months. They escalated, they were mismanaged, there were elite fragments, the central leadership divided. We're some way from that at the moment. I'm not saying that could happen. I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but I think we're some way from that at the moment. At the moment, though, I think it is likely that we will see some pretty hard-edged tactics. They may work, they may not, but that's what we'll probably see in the next few days.
Finally, Professor, given what you just said, what would it take for the situation to escalate to what we witnessed in 1989 with Tiananmen Square?
Continuing to lock people up for long, long times in their homes and having an economy that's tanking. And the economy is the key thing, because there's never been a furlough scheme in China in the last couple of years. People have had to take the economic brunt. Growth is low, unemployment is high, the housing market is pretty poor at the moment, and that's where 70% of people's wealth is tied up, double what it is in America. So if these things are not addressed, we have a problem. But I think, and before that, not.
Professor Kerry Brown from King's College London, thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you.